It's not always easy figuring out what to do next. Time always seems more limited when you've got multiple things going on. Multiple projects, multiple things to do, each of which with various commitment and severity levels, of course. And even when you think you've got a steady plan put together, is a plan ever really a sure thing? Rarely, actually. Life happens, priorities shift, and things just take longer than you'd expect. So you move on. You adjust your plan, checking things off and adding even more. You've got things that you want to work on, but those are balanced with things that you really should be working on. And even then it's not so clear-cut. What if you've got multiple obligations and things that need doing, both of which are important, but they're close enough that you need to make that call. Figure out which one needs to be done first. So you make a call, and with that decision, everything's all settled, right? Well, I wish that was the case. No matter how good your plan is, or how badly you want it to go smoothly, all you've got to do is ask yourself one simple question. Will that ever actually happen? Come to think of it, the only reason dealing with huge issues for the other cars has even been possible is because of this car, so I really ought to be more grateful to it. Though it has been far from perfect. I mean, take right now for instance. The car's stuck with 4 gears, so I can't even really take it on the freeway. But hey, it remained drivable, unlike the issues the E30 and the S4 faced. Plus, the parts to fix the E30's brakes should be here today. So after we do that, we can finally sort out the TT shifter issue and look into some random feeling I've been noticing with the rear of the car. I feel like these projects never seem to end, but that's also not really a bad thing. All in due time though. Gotta stick to the plan, which should go smoothly. I've gotta fix the E30 brakes and then I'll finally have time to work on this car. Well, that definitely changes things. I can't exactly fix the E30 without the parts to fix it. Yet another delay. But on the other hand, that does mean I'll have time to work on the TT now, so that'll be fun. It's been so cold lately, I almost forgot that this car's window doesn't drop down when you open the door. Windows just aren't really something I worry about when it's the time of year I wear more than one coat. But spring is right around the corner, and since I'm going to be working on this car anyways, I might as well take some time to look into this. And I think it goes a bit further than just needing a reset. Right now, I've got 3 separate issues that I'm dealing with this car. Firstly, the shifter bushing and 4 gears. But my rear suspension has also been feeling a little bit different lately, and that's worth looking at too. Plus, I can't forget the window. 3 completely different issues. How do you pick the best place to start in a situation like this? And I know there's no real right or wrong answer to that, but it's an interesting question. For starters, when you have a lot vying for your attention, it's always tempting to just try and do everything at once. But is that really the best way to handle things? I might not be able to fix any of these issues today, but I'm hoping to at least figure out what's causing each and every one. And the first one I want to look at is the shifter. We've got a lot of play in all 4 of the gears that we can reach, so I should see what's loose. Pretty quickly I realized what the issue was. There's a little bushing called the first gear getter that fits on the end of this. Without it, there's a ton of play, and it seems to have just fallen off. And this is actually the 3rd bushing that's been here. After my stock bushing failed, I got one from Diesel Geek. It lasted a couple months before popping out like this. They were kind enough to send me a new one, and unfortunately, it looks like it did just the same thing. Not the end of the world, because we can just put it back in, but it doesn't really fix our issue. If it's just gonna pop out every couple months, I'd rather look for an alternative. It's a tolerance fit, and clearly after a while of driving and using it, it's no longer tolerant. It's also normally pretty easy to just put it back in place from the top. The old one used to pop out all the time, so I've done this a lot. This time, however, luck wasn't exactly on my side. It ended up falling into a hole underneath the shifter itself, meaning the only way I was going to be able to get that bushing back in place is by taking out the entire interior again, which I was trying to avoid until I had a long-term fix for this, but here we are. After quite a bit of time spent fishing, I got the bushing out and finally was able to make a short-term modification. My thought is that if I cut some slits into it, it'll be slightly wider and fit in there just a bit tighter. Maybe that'll buy me a couple more months. Who really knows? Either way, that was my hope at the time. That hope quickly disappeared though when I realized it wasn't the only issue. Turns out this was just the tip of the iceberg. Even with it back in place, there's still a huge amount of play when I'm in gear. And the bigger issue is it seems to be coming from a number of places, to the point where I think pretty much the whole shift box should be rebuilt. Gotta love 20-year-old German plastic. It seems like this whole thing is just starting to crumble. I wish there was a billet version of this. It looks like the only real upgrade to this, other than a new OEM one, is a tower shifter. And I'm not a huge fan of cutting the interior, but this is definitely starting to show its age. All these little millimeters of play in each individual section add up, and the result is a truly mediocre gear feel. The car does shift, but there's enough wrong here that I think it does warrant an upgrade, whatever that ends up being. While I think about ways to improve that, I figure the next best use of my time is going to be to figure out what's going on with the window, and the first step in doing that is going to be to remove the door card, which is only a couple bolts and clips away. Even before taking the door card off, I had a theory that this was going to be the regulator. It's just super common on this era of Volkswagen-based cars. I mean, all of them in my S4 were broken at some point, 3 of which at the same time. And while this one looks okay on the surface, the second I unbolted the motor, I could see that the cable was completely unsprung underneath. Normally there's a sort of pulley that sits in here, but it looks like the cable got off its track at some point in its life and was bound up for who knows how long. But at least hopefully that means it's an easy fix. Regulators are kind of fun to swap too. The only thing that's annoying on this car specifically is just how many bolts hold the insides of the door in place. The S4 has something like 4 bolts holding each door in place, but this car has many more, and they're not all bolts. Along with the copious amounts of hardware, there's also adjustment screws which you need to remember the initial position of. Otherwise, you'll have to fiddle with it at the end. It all seemed over-engineered, but really, that wouldn't be a shocker with this car. And with the final piece of hardware removed, the inside of the door was ready to come out. And next on the list is removing the old regulator, which, like normal, requires quite a bit of drilling since it's held in with pop rivets. I definitely had a hunch that this was a regulator to begin with, so I actually ordered one ahead of time. The only issue is the rivets on this window are actually a lot larger than the ones in the S4. So this is as far as I'll be able to take the window issue without running to the store. And with this as far as I could take it, I figured the next best use of my time was with the rear suspension. I've noticed the rear seems to wander quite a bit in corners, usually some sort of a bushing. And since this car has a tubular suspension and coilovers, there's really only a couple bushings it could be. And the number one culprit is the rear trailing arm. So that's what I decided to look for first. And just as I suspected, they are absolutely showing their age. That would absolutely explain all the feelings you get when driving this car. Too bad out of all the bushings on this car, this one is one of the more annoying ones to replace. Oh well. Is it already 1? It feels like I've got absolutely nothing done today, but I also need to be somewhere. As it turns out, there was a bit of a wild card going on this weekend. The 3 cars are priorities of mine, and I was absolutely debating the priorities of each one of them. But that's the thing. At this point, these 3 projects weren't alone. Or at least they might not be alone depending on what happens in the next couple weeks. And these 2 wildcards were actually quite a bit higher priority, so leaving at that time wasn't optional. It was, however, worth it. All I knew at the moment was just how limited my time actually was. If being forced to leave one car torn apart was good for anything, it was one singular confirmation. It's easy to get overwhelmed when you have a lot to do, especially on a time crunch. I think if you're too focused on figuring out where to start, you end up not starting at all. So many things to consider, you're stuck in the world of analysis rather than actually doing anything. And if you just try and do everything at once, you never make much progress on any singular part of it. Maybe, at the end of the day, it doesn't even matter where you start. The next morning I came back with one singular intention. Try to get this car at least a little better than it was before, and hopefully with the knowledge from yesterday I'll be able to fix at least one of the issues. And since I also picked up some larger rivets, I figured the window was the best place to start. That's the only one of the 3 that could still have something else wrong with it. After all, the regulator may not have been the only issue. The only way I was going to be able to find out would be to plug everything back in with this back in the car. So I had my work cut out for me. I got everything reinstalled to the point where I was able to test the window. And while the door card wasn't hung on the door, it was plugged in. So all that was left to do was put the keys in and press the switch. And thankfully, it worked like a dream. And I can't even begin to describe how glad I am about that. This window's been inoperable for most of my ownership, so this is a tremendous improvement. I put the door card back on and turned my sights towards the interior. I still need to figure out a long-term solution for the shift box in this car. I could see a couple different things happening. We could go with an all-new OE setup if I could even source one, or we could just bite the bullet and get a tower shifter. The only con with that is I've got to cut the interior a bit, but at least this decision doesn't have to be made right this second. I'm hoping with the slits we cut into the first gear getter, it lasts a couple more months, but we won't know until we drive the car. And as fun as it would be to drive the car without the center console, I opted to just toss it back in. I even already have the bushings to go into the rear, but I'm not going to put them in yet. And the issue doesn't lie with the bushings themselves. They're pretty easy to get to. The issue is what you have to remove to get to them. For some reason, this car is designed so that to replace those, you need to disconnect a hard brake line, meaning we're going to have to bleed the brakes and likely the ABS system with VCDS, which is also on the way, but it's not here yet. And since the S4 needs that done as well, I don't really want to drive two cars with squishy brakes. So for now, that one's just going to stay at the position where we know what the issue is. Figuring out where to go when you're being pulled multiple directions is always difficult. At least it's something I always struggle with. I feel like I've always got a million things going on. No matter how much I do, there's always going to be more to do, and it's really easy to let that be overwhelming. Plus, it's even more overwhelming if you try and do everything all at once. Or worse, you could spend so much time trying to figure out the best place to start that you never actually start. Stuck in the world of planning, analysis paralysis. And if you never start to begin with, what's the point? The whole point of creating a to-do list is checking things off of it. So my thought on the matter has always been pretty simple. It doesn't really matter where you start, nor does it really matter how fast you're going. To me, all that matters is that you do actually start, no matter where it is and no matter how long it takes you. Getting that initial momentum is always the hardest part, but once you do have it, it's a lot easier to pick up the pace. And if you just keep making improvements, you'll eventually get where you want to be. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, consider dropping a like and subscribing for more. That's the best way you can help support me and my content. Either way, I will see you guys in the next episode. Thank you again. Have a wonderful day.